I never thought a simple hug from my son could turn my entire world upside down. But what he said next left me completely speechless. I couldn't believe that one sentence would make me question everything, my marriage, my life, and even myself. If you think you know what love and family mean, think again. Stay with me, because this true anonymous confession will take you on a journey you won't forget. Asterisk. There are moments in life that appear ordinary, but they mark the exact point where everything inside you shifts. For me, that moment was a hug, a simple, innocent hug that somehow cracked open parts of my heart I thought were long sealed. I had always seen myself as a strong woman, a wife, a mother, someone who managed to keep her home together no matter how cold it felt. My husband, God bless him, was more of a provider than a partner. We spoke less and less as the years went on, our conversations reduced to grocery lists and bills. Somewhere along the line, I stopped expecting warmth from him. I stopped even asking for it. Then there was my son. He grew up fast, faster than I was ready for. One day he was that little boy who used to fall asleep on my lap, and the next, he was a young man, taller than me, with a voice that could silence a room. He had his father's calmness, but his eyes were mine, deep, emotional, and always searching. That evening was nothing special, or so I thought. It was raining heavily, and I remember feeling this ache in my chest, the kind that comes from missing something you can't quite name. My husband had gone on another business trip. The house was quiet except for the sound of rain tapping against the window. My son walked into the living room, noticing how quiet I was. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked, his tone gentle. I nodded, forcing a small smile, but he didn't buy it. He walked closer and sat beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. That simple gesture, that warmth, was something I hadn't felt in so long. I don't know what came over me, but I leaned in and hugged him. It wasn't planned, it wasn't calculated, it just happened. My arms wrapped around him tightly, and I felt the strength of his embrace, the steadiness of it. For a brief second, I felt safe again. And then, he said it. Softly. Almost as if he didn't mean for me to hear. "Mom. I'll always be here for you. Even if Dad isn't." My breath caught. My heart felt like it skipped a beat. There was something in his voice, something protective, something mature, something unexpected. I pulled back just slightly to look at him. His eyes were full of sincerity, maybe even pain. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to tell him how much that meant to me, but my throat refused to form words. For the rest of the night, I couldn't stop replaying that moment. That voice. That warmth. That statement. Something inside me had shifted, and I knew life in that house would never feel the same again. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythmic hum of the rain that hadn't stopped since evening. My husband's side of the bed was, as usual, empty, cold and untouched. But what haunted me wasn't his absence. It was my son's voice replaying in my head like a song that wouldn't stop. "Mom. I'll always be here for you. Even if Dad isn't." It wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. The sincerity, the weight, the pain tucked behind those words. It stirred something inside me that I wasn't ready to face. For years, I had felt invisible. I cooked, cleaned, smiled, did everything a wife was supposed to do. But inside, I was hollow, like a woman living on autopilot. My husband and I had stopped sharing anything beyond daily logistics. Affection had become foreign. So when my son said those words, it hit me somewhere deep, a part of me that had been starving for connection. The next morning, I tried to act normal. Breakfast. Coffee. The usual routine. But every time I looked at him, something in me shifted, not in a wrong way, but in a way that made me feel. He greeted me with his usual warm smile, but I caught him looking at me differently too, as if he sensed my sadness and didn't know how to fix it. Later that afternoon, he offered to help me in the kitchen. It wasn't unusual, but there was something about his presence that felt heavier, more aware. The silence between us spoke louder than any words could. Every movement, passing me a dish, brushing by me, seemed to carry a quiet electricity. "Mom," he said suddenly, breaking the silence, "you don't smile like you used to." That statement stopped me cold. I froze, spoon in hand, unsure whether to laugh or cry. "I guess life does that to you," I said softly, trying to hide the tremor in my voice. He looked at me, really looked, as if he was seeing me not just as his mother but as a woman who had been forgotten by life. That gaze was both comforting and terrifying. I turned away, pretending to focus on the pot simmering on the stove. "Don't worry about me," I whispered, though I knew it was a lie. He walked up behind me and gently placed a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, I mean it. You deserve to be happy." Those words, so simple, so pure, made my chest tighten. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or guilty. I wanted to hug him again, but I didn't. I couldn't. The line between comfort and confusion was already too thin. That night, I sat by my window again, the rain gone but my mind still clouded. His words echoed through me, wrapping around my thoughts like vines. I didn't understand why they affected me so much. Maybe because no one had told me I deserved happiness in years. Not even my husband. Not even myself. But now, those words from my own son were awakening emotions I didn't know how to handle. I tried to dismiss them as simple affection, a son caring for his mother, but my heart wouldn't listen. And deep down, I knew, this was only the beginning of something I wasn't ready for. The house had never felt quieter. My husband had returned from his trip that morning, but it didn't change much. We exchanged polite greetings and empty words, pretending everything was fine. We had become experts at that, pretending. But my heart wasn't calm. My son's words still echoed inside me. They replayed at random moments, while folding laundry, while cooking, even while I tried to sleep. His kindness had touched something fragile in me, something I'd forgotten how to handle. That evening, we all sat down to dinner together. It should have been comforting, the three of us sharing a meal like a family. But I felt like a stranger at my own table. My husband talked about work, about the project he was managing, about things that didn't matter. My son nodded politely, but his eyes kept drifting toward me, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that made me feel seen. When dinner ended, my husband went straight to his study, as he always did. The sound of his door closing was my cue that the silence would return. My son stayed behind to help me clear the dishes. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he broke the silence. "You and Dad don't talk much anymore." I froze. His tone wasn't judgmental, it was full of quiet sadness. I wanted to defend myself, but the truth was too heavy. "We just grew apart, I guess," I said, keeping my eyes on the sink. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he murmured, "You deserve more than silence, Mom." That sentence hit me like a wave. I turned to him, and our eyes met, not as mother and son, but as two people who understood what loneliness looked like. I took a deep breath and forced a small smile. "Life gets complicated, sweetheart. Sometimes people stop hearing each other, even when they're in the same house." He nodded slowly, as if he understood more than I expected. "Then maybe it's time you remind him to listen." I didn't know what to say. His maturity stunned me. There was no hidden meaning, no boundary crossed, just raw honesty from someone who had seen too much silence between his parents. After he went to his room, I stood by the kitchen window for a long time, staring into the night. The reflection in the glass looked like a stranger, tired eyes, half a smile, a woman holding herself together for everyone else. For the first time in years, I let a few tears fall. Not from guilt, not from confusion, but from realization. My son wasn't trying to replace something missing in my life. He was reminding me that I had stopped fighting for myself a long time ago. He had spoken truth through the quiet, through care, through the kind of love that comes not from desire but from deep understanding. That night, I sat on my bed, holding on to that thought. The silence between me and my husband still lingered, but something inside me had changed. I promised myself that it wouldn't stay that way forever. Days turned into weeks, and yet that conversation with my son stayed with me. His honesty, his quiet strength, they lingered in my thoughts, shaping the way I saw everything around me. For years, I had lived in shadows, pretending not to notice how distant my marriage had become. But once someone reminds you of what warmth feels like, it's impossible to go back to the cold. The house had a strange stillness lately. My husband and I still moved around each other like polite strangers, two people tied together by duty, not affection. I began to notice how automatic everything had become, the good morning that sounded more like a routine, the meals shared in silence, the good nights that never touched the heart. One afternoon, I found myself cleaning the sitting room when I stumbled upon an old family photo, the three of us smiling, years younger, lighter somehow. My husband's arm was around my shoulder, and my son stood in front of us, grinning. For a moment, I couldn't help but wonder where that version of us had gone. That evening, my son joined me on the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft oranges and pinks. It was peaceful, almost painfully so. "You've been thinking a lot lately," he said quietly, his voice steady. I smiled faintly. "You've noticed?" He nodded. "You always look out the window like you're trying to find something you lost." His words were gentle, but they landed deep. I sighed, not because I was sad, but because I finally felt seen. "Maybe I am," I admitted. "Maybe I lost myself somewhere along the way." He leaned back in his chair. "Then maybe it's time you find her again." I looked at him, my son, speaking like a man far beyond his years. It struck me how much he'd grown, how much he understood about love and life, even without experiencing much of it. I realized then that what I'd been feeling wasn't confusion, it was gratitude. Gratitude that my son had become the kind of person who noticed what others ignored. The shadows that had once blurred the lines of my emotions began to fade. It wasn't love misplaced, it was affection misunderstood. The comfort I found in him wasn't something to hide, it was something to honor. It was proof that even when life takes away passion or connection, empathy still finds a way to reach us. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat by my window with a notebook. I hadn't written in years, but words started to pour out of me, about love, loneliness, motherhood, and all the spaces in between. I wrote about how we often confuse love with attention, silence with peace, and endurance with strength. And how sometimes, the people who remind us of our worth are not strangers, but the ones who quietly stand beside us when we're falling apart. When I closed the notebook, I felt lighter. My heart no longer ached the way it used to. Maybe this was what healing felt like, not forgetting the pain, but finally understanding it. And maybe, just maybe, the shadows I once feared weren't meant to haunt me, but to teach me how to find light again. It's strange how understanding doesn't always come in a moment of clarity, but in quiet waves, little realizations that build until the truth finally makes sense. That's what happened to me. It wasn't one conversation, one embrace, or one tearful night. It was everything, the loneliness, the silence, the kindness I didn't know I still deserved. Weeks after that talk with my son, I began to notice small changes in myself. I smiled more. I spoke up more. I started cooking meals I loved again, not just the ones my husband preferred. I listened to music while cleaning, filled the house with warmth that had been missing for too long. One Saturday morning, I walked past my son's room and heard him laughing on the phone. A genuine laugh, the kind that fills a home with life. It reminded me that no matter how heavy my heart had felt, love had still managed to survive within these walls. Later that day, while folding clothes, my husband walked in, something he rarely did. He looked tired, older somehow. For a long time, we just stood there in silence. Then he said quietly, "You've changed lately. The house feels different." I hesitated before answering, maybe I just stopped waiting for happiness to return. I decided to make room for it again. He looked at me, unsure how to respond. But I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen in years, reflection, maybe even regret. And though it didn't erase the years of distance, it reminded me that healing doesn't always need apologies. Sometimes it starts when one person decides to stop giving up. That evening, my son came home early. We sat in the living room, and out of nowhere, he said, "Mom, you look happier." I smiled, realizing I finally understood what he'd been trying to tell me that day when he said, "I'll always be here for you, even if Dad isn't." He hadn't been trying to replace anyone. He had been reminding me that love, in any form, was still within reach. That I didn't have to disappear just because life had grown quiet. I reached for his hand and said softly, "You were right, sweetheart. I just forgot how to listen to myself." He smiled, a bit shyly, and squeezed my hand. "You never really lost that, Mom. You just needed someone to remind you." That night, I sat on the porch alone, listening to the hum of crickets and the faint sound of laughter inside. The world felt lighter. The shadows that once weighed me down had turned into lessons, reminders that affection can come from understanding, not confusion, that connection doesn't always lead to sin, but sometimes to salvation. I realized then that my story wasn't about betrayal or longing. It was about rediscovery, of who I was, and what love truly meant. And though I'll remain anonymous, I share this because maybe someone out there feels the same emptiness I once felt. Maybe they need to hear that it's okay to start over, to find joy again, even after silence. Because sometimes, it takes someone else's words to remind us that we were never truly broken, just waiting to be seen again. This story is a dramatized emotional confession based on real-life experiences. All characters remain anonymous to protect privacy. No explicit content is included. The purpose is emotional reflection and awareness, not sensationalism. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true life confessions and emotional stories that remind us we're never truly alone. Your support helps us bring more powerful, real-life experiences to light. See you in our next video, where another truth will unfold.